This is The Negro Speaks of Rivers, one of my earliest poems written in 1920, just after I came out of high school. The way this poem came to be written was that I was going to Mexico to visit my father, who lived in Mexico City, and on the train going across the Mississippi River, just outside St. Louis, I looked out the window and I saw this great muddy river flowing down toward the heart of the South, and I began to think about what this river meant to the Negro people, how, in a sense, our history was linked to this river, how in slavery time my grandmother told me that to be sold down the Mississippi was one of the worst things that could happen to a Negro slave. And then I remembered that I'd read about Abraham Lincoln going down the Mississippi as a young man, and he went on a raft to New Orleans, and he saw human beings bought and sold in the slave market there, and he was so horrified by this that he never forgot it. And many years later, of course, we know that it was Lincoln who signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And so, as the train went on into the gathering dusk, because it had been about sunset when we crossed the river, I took my father's letter out of my pocket and began to write down on the back of his letter this poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I have seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers.
The poem begins with a short phrase which is repeated throughout the entirety of the poem. I've known rivers. He continues to describe these rivers as being older than humanity itself, linking his very essence to that of the earth. In the third stanza, he continues with his description of these rivers, as well as elaborating on his relationship with them. Through these descriptions, Hughes takes us on a journey of the history of African American people, connecting them to various historically significant rivers. In the next stanza, a repeated phrase is coupled with another description. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. We can conclude from this previous stanza that the rivers are symbols of the Negro's past. And here, the word dusky suggests that it has been a dark one, full of hardship and struggle. The concluding line ties all of these ideas together. It tells us that the Negro's soul has been shaped by centuries and centuries of experience on earth. Much like the water of a river cuts through the ground to grow deeper over time. Altogether, this poem is about the historical and cultural significance of the Negro. Written in a time when they were considered to be insignificant as a whole, this is similar to Hughes' poem, I Too. Both of these poems celebrate the Negro by connecting them to a greater whole. Historical rivers in The Negro Speaks of Rivers and American in I Too. In this way, the speaker in each poem effectively establishes himself as a human despite his skin color, showing a resilient not to give up and despite their hardships. As far as structure goes, both of these poems have many I's statements throughout, firmly giving the speaker a strong identity as an individual. Each poem also has a lot of repetition that reaffirms the speaker's meaning. The main difference between these poems lie in the context of each. In The Negro Speaks of Rivers, Hughes takes us through the history of the Negro people, only briefly touching on his present-day America. However, I, too, focuses much more on the segregation taking place in America at the time Hughes was writing the poem. Through these two poems, Langston Hughes draws the attention of his readers to the Negro problem in early 20th century America.